it's Jasma, and today I'm going to show you how to make a holiday tiramisu cake. The second video I ever posted on this channel was this Christmas tiramisu, and it still remains one of my favorite recipes. Although it has been 4 years, and through that time I've experimented with different techniques and some modifications to the recipe, so I thought it was about time I gave you an upgraded version of this cake for the holidays. I know some of you have commented about how far I go for something that you eat in the blink of an eye. It's totally fine that you don't understand my madness. So if you do want just a really simple tiramisu that you can whip together really quickly, this recipe still works great. You can just make the tiramisu inside of a deep dish, skip all of the decor, use store-bought Ladyfingers, and it'll still be a really delicious tiramisu. But it is the holidays and it has been a long year, so I'm not about to show you just another regular traditional tiramisu. So I'm going all the way with the decor. It is very extra. I've made a chocolate curl fence and added lots of different toppings to make this as festive as it can be. I even bought my own gold luster dust, so you know it's about to be a fun time. Let's get started. First, I'm making my ladyfingers. If you don't want to go through this hassle and make your own ladyfingers, you can just buy some store-bought ones that are pre-made. That is what I have done with all of my past tiramisu recipes, and it works perfectly fine. But I wanted to show you how you can make your own ladyfingers so that you can modify its flavors and also its shape. Here are the ingredients you'll need. They're also available in the description down below, but feel free to take a screenshot and follow along. Prepare a pot of boiling water. Then in a bowl that can sit on top of this pot without touching the water, crack in the eggs and add in the sugar. Give this a quick mix just to loosen up the eggs. Then begin cooking this on the double boiler. Constantly stir around the egg and sugar mixture, but you're not actually trying to give it volume, you're just making sure it doesn't scramble on top of the double boiler. Heating up the eggs is going to dissolve the sugar and also partially coagulate the eggs, which is going to allow it to hold much more volume when you whip it up later on. The mixture is ready once its temperature is between 150 and 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Immediately transfer this into a stand mixer bowl. Then begin whipping the eggs on medium-high speed. In the meantime, in a separate bowl, sift together some all-purpose flour, cornstarch, and salt. We're just making sure there are no lumps inside of this, but also giving it a little bit more air so that it can incorporate into the eggs a lot better. After a few minutes, the eggs should have significantly increased in volume and become really pale in color. Now it is time to add in the flavorings. Ladyfingers itself doesn't have a lot of flavor to it, it's just a plain sponge cake, which is why it's fun to make it yourself because then you can add whatever you want to it. You can use lemon zest, orange zest, or today I'm using a combination of vanilla extract and a little bit of nutmeg, so just add that in and mix until combined. Now pour in the sifted dry ingredients and very gently fold that in. I like to use the whisk attachment from the stand mixer and it actually works very well. You can also use a large balloon whisk or just use a spatula. Stop mixing as soon as there are no more dry bits of flour. It is very important you do not overmix this because you need to have the ladyfingers retain a lot of its air in order for it to be spongy and crispy in the end. The batter should be quite thick and have lots of bubbles in it, and as soon as it is ready, transfer it into a piping bag loaded with a round tip. If you don't have a piping bag, you can also just use a really large Ziploc bag. When it comes to shaping the ladyfingers, this is where I'm going to deviate from the traditional path. Instead of piping them out into actual ladyfingers, I'm going to make 2 discs of 8-inch ladyfingers, so essentially it is just a layer of sponge cake. I'm doing this for 2 reasons. First is just convenience, because I'm making a round cake, and ladyfingers are made to fit inside of a rectangular dish, which is what traditional tiramisus typically are. So I find that it's just easier to make the ladyfingers into the shape that you're gonna put into the cake later on, instead of having to chop up each ladyfinger to fit inside of the final cake, which is what I have done before. The second reason is because I find the cake is a lot more stabilized when you have 2 pieces of cohesive ladyfinger. Flavor-wise, everything is going to taste exactly the same. It will just look a little bit different. So prepare 2 8-inch cake pans by lining the bottom with parchment paper, then piping out a very even spiral of the ladyfinger batter. If you're wondering why not just spread out the batter with a spatula instead of piping it, that is because using a spatula to move around the batter too much will pop all of the air and lead to a really dense ladyfinger. With the leftover batter, I am just going to pipe them out into regular ladyfingers, but that is of course optional. Before baking these, you want to sprinkle on top some sugar. The sugar is just going to help them rise a lot more and hold its shape a lot better. Then immediately bake until the surface is just slightly golden brown. The ladyfinger discs are finished baking and I let them cool completely inside of the cake pan itself. Once it comes out of the oven, it will feel really soft and kind of like a sponge cake, but as it cools, it will dry up and turn into a really crispy texture. And that's when we can remove it from its cake pan by running a butter knife around the edge. This step is optional. If you don't care as much as I do about the appearance of the cake, you can just skip it. But I actually like to trim off just the slightest bit of the edge of this ladyfinger disc, because then you can have the cream just be a nice and even layer around the ladyfingers, and it'll look it just looks nicer once it is chilled and taken out of the cake pan. So instead of taking a knife or using a cookie cutter that is just the right size to trim it to the size, what I actually do is just place this back into the baking tray. And since this is so crunchy, you are able to kind of just scrape off the edges by twisting it around. I know this is a tiny amount, but I swear it really does make a difference. Then peel off the parchment paper and you'll have 2 perfect ladyfinger discs. The ladyfinger layer is ready, so just set that aside. Now we can work on the tiramisu cream. Add the gelatin powder into some cold water, give it a good mix, and then set it aside until it becomes hardened so we can use it for later. Traditionally, you won't have gelatin inside of a tiramisu, but since I'm trying to get the cake to stand up all on its own, I'm gonna need the help of a little bit of stabilizer. Don't worry, you're not gonna taste the gelatin at all, and the texture of the tiramisu is still really light and airy. For the eggs, I'm gonna start by separating the egg whites from the egg yolks because you're only using the yolks in this recipe. Since you don't want raw egg yolks inside of a tiramisu, we're going to once again cook it on top of a double boiler. So let the water come to a boil. And while that's heating up, I'm gonna add the white granulated sugar into the egg yolks and mix it together. Once the water comes to a boil, turn the heat down to medium and begin cooking the egg yolks. First, using a spatula to scrape this constantly, like we did for the eggs for the ladyfinger. And you want to let this cook until the sugar is completely dissolved, and then we're gonna start whipping it up. I did this by hand because it gives me more control, but you can also use a hand mixer since it gets a bit tiring. Don't forget to scrape down the sides every once in a while to prevent clumps. The final mixture should be really thick and pale. Melt down the gelatin that we bloomed earlier until it's liquid, and while the egg mixture is still warm, mix that in. It's important to combine these two while the eggs are still warm so the gelatin doesn't set instantly. Now, time for the mascarpone cheese, which is what gives the tiramisu such a distinct taste. Add that directly into the egg mixture, along with some vanilla extract, and mix everything until smooth. If the gelatin has set and it's getting a little harder to mix, you can microwave this just to heat everything up and smooth it down. Once complete, cover this with some plastic wrap and place into the fridge to chill. Now I'm going to quickly prepare some espresso to soak the ladyfingers with. I'm using instant coffee granules, but you can also make fresh espresso if you would like. Traditional tiramisu also has alcohol inside of it, so you can add some Kahlua into this, but I am 16 and we're not gonna break the law today. So let this cool a little bit. Usually you would soak the ladyfingers immediately before you assemble the tiramisu, but since these layers are actually quite thick and it's a really big piece, I'm soaking this beforehand so that it actually gets to absorb all of the liquid. I'm going to spoon the liquid over rather than brushing it, because if you brush it, you're really not putting on any liquid at all. I have tried that and I was disappointed. Ladyfinger is a very dry sponge, which is why it can absorb quite a bit of liquid, so don't worry if this looks like a lot, it will be able to soak it all up. However, don't dip this in the coffee because then it will become just completely mushy and you don't want that. The last thing to do before assembling is combining the mascarpone cheese mixture along with whipped cream. Now usually we would whip up the cream separately and then fold it in with the mascarpone cheese mixture, but after some experimenting I found a technique that actually makes this process, I'd say, a little bit quicker and also easier, and you lead to a smoother result. So I have my stand mixer once again with a whisk attachment, and then to the bowl I'm actually going to add in the chilled mascarpone cheese mixture first. Having this in the fridge not only cooled down the overall mixture, but it also made it thicker because the gelatin has set. This way when we whip it up, it's actually going to hold a little bit more volume. Now whip this on medium-high speed until it becomes a little bit looser and also lighter in color. Give the sides a good scrape to make sure that nothing is caught on the bottom. Then begin streaming in the whipping cream directly into this mixture. It'll look a little soupy at first and take some time before it is fully incorporated, but it will whip up into a nice and smooth and thick mixture. Now we can assemble the cake. So I have an 8-inch cake pan with a removable bottom. If you have a ring mold, you can also use that, but I feel like this works perfectly fine. Start with the first layer of the soaked ladyfinger. It will be a bit softer at this point, so just be gentle with it. Then pour on half of the tiramisu cream. Spread this out and into the gap that we created around the side of the cake pan, then place on the second layer of that ladyfinger and the second half of the cream. Smooth it out using some spatulas. This is just going to create a nice and flat surface for you to work with and decorate later on. Also tap the pan to avoid air bubbles. Now I'm gonna cover this with a plate and then place into the fridge to chill overnight until it is completely set. I would usually use plastic wrap to do this, but I found that plastic wrap really easily sinks and it touches the surface, which will mess up your tiramisu, so this is just the safest way to go. For decor, I'm making a chocolate curl fence, so melt down some dark chocolate melts until it is smooth, then spread it out into a very thin layer on a clean kitchen counter. Some people also do this on the back of a baking tray, but I find that that ends up scratching the paint, so this is just how I prefer to do it. To curl the chocolate, you're going to need a bench scraper, excellent eyeballing skills, and really great timing. Let this chocolate sit until it is soft enough to be molded into a curl, but hard enough to hold its shape. To tell if it's ready, just look at the surface of the chocolate. If it is still super shiny, that means it's wet, but once it has set a little bit, it will become a little more dull on the surface. It takes practice before you can consistently get perfect curls, but don't worry, since chocolate is chocolate, you can just melt it down if you mess up and have to try it again. Measure the total length of your chocolate curls and see if it matches the circumference of your cake to see if it is enough to actually cover the entire thing. Try to create curls of different sizes and lengths, and once you've made enough, place them into the fridge. I also painted some macarons to use as a topping, so just mix together some edible gold luster dust with clear almond extract or any sort of clear alcohol and paint whatever design you'd like. I'm sandwiching my shells with some whipped chocolate ganache and keeping them in the fridge till I need to use them later. The tiramisu is chilled and all of the decoration is ready to go, so we can begin the assembly. Release the tiramisu from its mold by running a warm towel around the edge just to loosen it a little bit. Since this has a removable bottom, the easiest way to get the tiramisu out of here is to place a tall cup or any sort of tall, stable object underneath the pan and then just push really gently. Smooth out the edges of the tiramisu with an offset spatula if you would like, and then cover the surface with a light layer of cocoa powder. I dust the cocoa powder before transferring this onto the serving platter because it'll make a mess around the edges, so this just makes everything a lot cleaner. Transfer the tiramisu onto a serving platter. This part is always tricky, so just be careful with it. Now we can begin decorating. So I trimmed the chocolate curls to the length that I want it to be and placed them all around the tiramisu, gently pressing it so that it actually sticks. Once the chocolate fence is complete, I decorated the top with my painted macarons, some fresh raspberries, a mini ladyfinger, and a variety of different sprinkles. As a final touch, I also went back in with my gold luster dust paint, and I gently swiped them on the raspberries and a little bit more on the macarons. That's it with this video. I really hope that you enjoyed this glowed up version of my holiday tiramisu. This truly is a delicious dessert with an incredibly creamy tiramisu filling juxtaposed with a slightly crunchy ladyfinger layer and slight bitterness from the coffee and the cocoa powder on top. It also looks beautiful and you can dress it up however you like for really any occasion. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please like and subscribe if you want to see more of these recipes, and I hope to see you next time.